Hey folks, welcome to Deep Dive Dispatch, the podcast where we don't just scratch the surface, we dig deep into the political landscapes that shape our world today. I'm excited to introduce your guides on this journey through history and headlines, John Matthews and his insightful co-host, Sarah Collins. Together, they'll peel back the layers of complex political issues, offering a slightly conservative viewpoint while staying rooted in facts and historical context. So, buckle up for a thought-provoking ride as we dive into the stories behind the stories. This is Deep Dive Dispatch. Let's get started.
Hey there. Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today we're going deep into a fascinating set of sources you've shared with us.
Yeah.
All about government spending, the deep state, and a new initiative called DOGE that's making waves.
I think what's fascinating here is we're seeing sources from across the political spectrum, think tanks, government reports, even a presidential campaign website.
Okay, let's unpack this. You've given us articles about waste in federal programs, the history of the military-industrial complex, and even some pretty heated congressional hearings about the weaponization of government agencies.
Right.
Plus, there's this buzz around DOGE, this new initiative headed by Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy.
And it's not just about what these sources say, but why they matter to you. Are you incredibly curious about how all these pieces fit together? Whatever your goal, we're here to guide you through it.
So let's start with that campaign website, Donald Trump's website to be exact. He's proposing to bring back something called impoundment power if he's elected.
Yeah.
What's the deal with that?
Well, the website claims it's all about curbing wasteful spending. Trump argues that the Congressional Budget Act of 1974, which limited this power, basically opened the floodgates for out-of-control spending.
Okay.
He points to the fact that the national debt has skyrocketed since then, never dipping below its 1974 level.
Okay, so Trump's framing this as a way to rein in the budget, but we also have this GAO report highlighting waste in federal programs. Does it offer any solutions?
The GAO report focuses on the mechanics of waste, particularly the difficulty of tracking goods and services across the government.
Right.
It basically says if you don't have a clear picture of what you have and where it's going, waste is inevitable. Imagine one department swimming in surplus paper clips,
Right.
while another can't get their hands on enough. It's that kind of inefficiency they're talking about.
Makes sense. But how does this tie into the military-industrial complex, which one of the sources describes it seems like a whole other beast?
It's a crucial connection because the military-industrial complex has a huge influence on government spending. This term, coined after World War II, refers to the close relationship between the government, the military, and the defense industry. They all benefit from high military spending, which can divert resources from other areas.
So it's like a self-perpetuating cycle. The defense industry pushes for more military spending, the government approves it, and the cycle continues even if it's not the most efficient use of resources.
Exactly. And this dynamic is evident in an article from the National Interest, which advocates for increased military spending. While the article frames it as peace through strength, it also highlights the influence of the military-industrial complex on policy.
Okay, so we're starting to see how these pieces fit together, but then there's the whole deep state concept, which always feels a bit like a conspiracy theory. What's the reality there?
This is where things get really interesting. The GovExec article we have presents a range of perspectives on the deep state. Some experts believe it's a real network of unelected bureaucrats who wield significant power and often undermine elected officials. Others see it as a harmful myth that erodes trust in government.
So is there any evidence to back up the idea of a deep state, or is it just a catch-all term for any bureaucratic inefficiency or resistance to change?
The article does mention some historical examples like President Reagan's clashes with the EPA, where his appointees felt undermined by career employees who seemed more focused on preserving their programs than enacting the administration's agenda.
Oh, wow.
It's a complex issue with arguments on both sides.
This reminds me of that congressional hearing transcript where they alleged that the Justice Department was weaponized against parents protesting at school board meetings. How does that fit into the deep state conversation?
The hearing focuses on a specific incident where the National School Boards Association sent a letter to the Biden administration comparing concerned parents to domestic terrorists. Following this, Attorney General Merrick Garland issued a memo directing federal law enforcement to address these supposed threats.
Wow, that's a serious escalation.
Yeah.
So are they saying the DOJ was used to silence dissent for political reasons?
That's the argument critics claim the DOJ was used to target parents who were simply exercising their First Amendment rights. The fact that the NSBA later apologized for the letter further fuels those accusations, suggesting the DOJ's response was disproportionate and politically motivated.
We've covered a lot of ground, and we haven't even gotten to DOGE yet.
I know, right?
From what I gather, it's supposed to be some sort of countermeasure to all of this, right?
That's where DOGE comes in.
Hey everyone, just taking a moment to send a huge shout out to all of you tuning in to Deep Dive Dispatch. Your support really keeps us going. And if you're enjoying the deep dives and want to help us continue bringing you these thought-provoking discussions, head over to deepdivedispatch.com. It's an awesome way to support the show and keep the conversation alive. Big thanks for being part of our community. Now, let's jump back into the next part of our episode and keep unraveling these intriguing topics. Enjoy.
This initiative, spearheaded by Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy, with Ron Paul as an advisor, aims to establish a Department of Government Efficiency, or DOGE. The Mises Institute article we have says they're drawing inspiration from initiatives like the Grace Commission under Reagan and reinventing government under Clinton.
So a team of efficiency experts looking to streamline government operations and cut waste. Sounds good in theory, but how will DOGE actually work?
The idea is to research, develop, and test ways to make government more efficient, ultimately offering concrete steps to cut spending and regulations. They even plan to have a podcast to keep the public informed and engaged.
A podcast about government efficiency, didn't see that coming from Elon Musk, but hey, maybe it'll be a hit. But one of the sources throws a wrench in the works, claiming that Congress, not unelected bureaucrats, is the real deep state.
Right.
How does that square with everything else we've discussed?
That's a provocative argument, isn't it? The source points out that Congress controls the budget. They decide how much money goes to each federal agency and have a massive influence on the bureaucracy's day-to-day operations.
So are they saying that if there is a deep state, it ultimately answers to Congress? That seems like a significant distinction.
It certainly adds another layer of complexity, and the Mises Institute article that talks about DOGE sees this initiative as a way to counter this deep state by shrinking the size and scope of government.
Okay.
It even compares politicians exploiting crises to grab more power to an alcoholic missing his daughter's graduation. A pretty stark analogy.
Okay, so they're saying that DOGE could shrink the government and in turn limit the power of this deep state, whether it's entrenched bureaucrats or Congress itself.
Right.
But we also have this article from Truth Out that brings the media into the picture.
Right. This article suggests that media consolidation and the focus on sensationalism, think Kim Kardashian instead of deep dives into government spending, contributes to public apathy and lets the deep state operate unchecked.
It's like we're distracted by shiny objects while the real power plays are happening behind the scenes. Then there's the Judicial Watch report that goes all in on the deep state and gets pretty specific.
This report is pretty alarming, actually. It claims that the deep state actively worked to undermine President Trump, using tactics like leaking classified information, relying on encrypted messaging apps to avoid oversight, and even politicizing agencies like the FBI and IRS for their own agenda.
Hold on, they're saying the FBI and IRS were used as political weapons. Do they have any evidence to back that up?
The report connects its claims to the findings of the Durham report, which investigated the origins of the FBI's investigation into alleged Trump-Russia collusion.
Oh, right. The Durham report found that the FBI relied on shaky evidence like the Steele dossier, which turned out to be largely discredited.
Exactly. While the Durham report didn't find enough evidence to prove criminal intent in most cases, it did expose serious flaws in the FBI's investigation, which lends some credibility to the Judicial Watch report's claims about the politicization of these agencies.
This is a lot to process. We've gone from government waste and the military-industrial complex to the deep state and potential weaponization of government agencies. And now we have DOGE, which is being presented as a solution to these deep-rooted problems.
It's important to remember that we've only just scratched the surface.
Right.
Each source offers a unique piece of the puzzle.
Definitely a lot to think about. Where do we go from here? So we've established that DOGE aims to streamline government and potentially reduce its influence. But one source seems skeptical about its chances of success, arguing that dismantling the deep state might be tougher than it seems.
Right. This Mises Institute article highlights a crucial point. Even if DOGE pinpoints areas to cut spending or regulations, those cuts still need to be implemented, and that requires cooperation from Congress. Remember, Congress holds the purse strings.
Right.
And they might not be too keen on giving up that power.
That makes sense. It's one thing to identify inefficiencies. It's another to actually get those changes enacted. Sounds like a potential clash between DOGE and the very people they're trying to reform.
Exactly, and this source suggests that members of Congress might have a vested interest in maintaining the status quo. A larger, more complex government often translates to more power and influence for those in control. So even with brilliant solutions, DOGE could face an uphill battle getting them implemented.
Okay, so we have this potential for conflict between DOGE and Congress. But what about the deep state itself? If it really exists, wouldn't it also resist these efforts to shrink government?
That's the question, isn't it? None of the sources directly address that, but based on what we've seen, it's certainly plausible. The Judicial Watch report, for example, claims that the deep state has a history of using tactics like leaks and obstruction to undermine those who threaten their power.
So imagine DOGE identifies a program riddled with waste and recommends cutting it, but then someone leaks classified information to derail the effort.
Right.
Or bureaucrats within the agency drag their feet and make implementation a nightmare.
Exactly. It's like a bureaucratic chess match, and DOGE could be up against some very skilled opponents.
This is starting to sound pretty bleak. Is there any reason to be optimistic about DOGE's chances?
Well, the Mises Institute article that supports DOGE does point to one potential advantage, public awareness. They argue that the attention Musk and Ramaswamy attract, coupled with their planned podcast, could generate significant public support for government reform. If the public demands change, it might be harder for Congress to ignore DOGE's recommendations.
Public pressure can be powerful, that's for sure.
Yeah.
But then again, that Truthite article argues that the media is often more interested in entertainment than informing the public about crucial issues like government spending. It's like we're caught between those who want to expose and reform the system and those who benefit from keeping us in the dark.
It's a complex dynamic, no doubt, and it's important to remember that each source presents a particular perspective, often with its own biases and agendas. Ultimately, it's up to you to weigh the evidence and form your own conclusions about DOGE's potential.
You're right. We've explored the potential friction between DOGE and Congress, the possibility of pushback from the deep state, and the media's role in all of this. Now, I'm curious about the specific tools DOGE might use to achieve its goals. What are we looking at there?
Well, we know DOGE is inspired by past initiatives like the Grace Commission, which focused on identifying cost-cutting measures within the government. But looking at what we have, it seems likely that DOGE will also draw inspiration from another historical example, the impoundment power that Trump wants to restore.
Ah, interesting. It's like we've come full circle. We started with Trump's push for impoundment power, and now we're seeing how it could be a key tool for DOGE to enforce its recommendations. Remind me how impoundment power works again.
It essentially gives the president the authority to refuse to spend funds allocated by Congress, basically putting a stop to spending they deem wasteful or unnecessary. Of course, this is controversial because it potentially shifts power away from Congress and towards the executive branch.
So picture this: DOGE flags a billion-dollar program as inefficient and recommends cutting it. But Congress, maybe under pressure from lobbyists or special interests, refuses to make the cut. Then Trump, armed with impoundment power, steps in and says, nope, we're not spending that money.
That's the scenario we're looking at. It sets up a high-stakes standoff with the president and DOGE on one side, and Congress potentially backed by powerful interests on the other.
Now, that's what I call political drama. But would Congress really just stand by and let the president override their spending decisions?
That's the million-dollar question, and it's hard to say for sure, but history offers some clues. In the early 1970s, there's a huge battle over impoundment power, with President Nixon asserting this authority and Congress pushing back. Eventually, Congress passed the Congressional Budget Act of 1974, which limited the president's ability to impound funds.
So Congress has shown they're willing to fight to protect their budgetary power.
Yeah.
But then again, today's political climate is very different, with deep partisan divisions and growing distrust of government.
That's true, and the success of DOGE and the use of impoundment power will likely depend heavily on the political landscape. A supportive Congress might be more open to working with DOGE and accepting some spending cuts. But a hostile Congress might use every tool at their disposal to block DOGE's efforts and challenge the use of impoundment power.
Feels like we're on shaky ground, waiting to see which way things will shift. This brings us back to that argument that Congress, not unelected bureaucrats, is the real deep state.
Right. That article really challenges the conventional view of the deep state. Remember, they argue that Congress controls the bureaucracy's funding and has a huge influence on its day-to-day operations. So if there's a deep state pulling strings, it ultimately answers to Congress.
That's an interesting perspective. It suggests that Even if DOGE successfully identifies waste and proposes cuts, they still need to get Congress on board, and if Congress is the real deep state, that might be a tough sell.
Exactly. And this source even suggests that Congress might have a vested interest in a large, complex government. More government programs and agencies often mean more power and influence for those who control the budget.
It's like a catch-22. DOGE needs Congress to implement its recommendations. But Congress might be the biggest obstacle to real change. So where does that leave the public in all of this? We've talked about how media consolidation and sensationalism can lead to apathy. But what if the public became more informed and engaged? Could that be the key to overcoming the deep state, whether it's entrenched bureaucrats or Congress itself?
That's a great question. Remember, the Mises Institute article supporting DOGE emphasized the importance of public awareness. They believe the attention Musk and Ramaswamy attract, along with their podcast, could generate a wave of support for government reform.
So the idea is that if the public demands change, Congress might be more likely to listen. It's like they're banking on a grassroots movement to counter the influence of the deep state.
Exactly, and there's historical precedent for public pressure leading to government reform. Think about the progressive era in the early 20th century when muckraking journalists exposed corruption and fueled public outcry for change.
You're right. That era led to things like child labor laws, food safety regulations, and more government accountability.
Right.
It shows that even deeply entrenched systems can be reformed when the public demands it.
Precisely, and that's where the media's role becomes crucial. If they can effectively inform and engage the public on these issues, it could create a powerful force for change.
Yeah.
But as that Truth Out article pointed out, that's a big if in today's media landscape.
It's fascinating how all these pieces connect. We've gone from specific tools DOGE might use to the broader historical and political context surrounding their mission. Clearly, DOGE's success hinges on a complex interplay of factors, including cooperation from Congress, potential resistance from the deep state, and the level of public awareness and engagement.
And remember, we've only scratched the surface here. Each source provides valuable insights, and it's up to you to weigh the evidence and draw your own conclusions. This deep dive has been quite a journey, and I think it's time to shift gears one last time and consider the potential long-term implications of DOGE, regardless of whether they succeed or fail.
I'm ready for that.
Hey everyone, just taking a moment to send a huge shout out to all of you tuning in to Deep Dive Dispatch. Your support really keeps us going. And if you're enjoying the deep dives and want to help us continue bringing you these thought-provoking discussions, head over to deepdivedispatch.com. It's an awesome way to support the show and keep the conversation alive. Big thanks for being part of our community. Now, let's jump back into the next part of our episode and keep unraveling these intriguing topics. Enjoy.
Let's dive into that final piece of the puzzle. All right, we're in the home stretch of our deep dive into government spending, the deep state, and the potential impact of DOGE. We've explored a lot of possibilities.
Yeah.
But the question that keeps coming back is this: what are the long-term implications of all of this for us and for the country as a whole?
That's the question, isn't it? We've discussed the potential for DOGE to streamline government, cut waste, and reduce the influence of the deep state. But we've also acknowledged the hurdles they face: resistance from Congress, pushback from entrenched bureaucrats, and the challenge of engaging a public that's often bombarded with distractions.
So let's game this out first. Let's imagine DOGE is successful. What would that mean for the balance of power in Washington and the relationship between the government and the people?
In a best-case scenario, a successful DOGE could lead to a smaller, more efficient government.
Okay.
With less spending and fewer regulations, this could empower individuals and businesses, giving them more freedom and control over their lives and work.
It sounds like the libertarian ideal: less government interference, more individual liberty. But what about the potential downsides? Could a smaller government also mean a weaker government, less equipped to handle things like national security or social welfare?
That's a valid concern. Remember, one of the sources argued for increased military spending, emphasizing the need for a strong national defense. A smaller government might also mean cuts to social programs that many people rely on.
So it's a balancing act, finding the sweet spot where government maximizes individual freedom while still effectively addressing critical national issues. What about the deep state? If DOGE succeeds in shrinking government, would that weaken its influence?
That's a key question. It's possible that a smaller, more streamlined government might be less susceptible to manipulation by unelected bureaucrats with fewer agencies and programs to control.
Yeah.
The deep state might have fewer opportunities to exert influence.
It's like cutting off the resources, as we talked about earlier. But that Judicial Watch report claimed the deep state actively worked to undermine President Trump. If they were willing to go that far, wouldn't they find ways to resist DOGE, even if it means operating outside the formal channels of government?
It's a chilling thought, but it's certainly possible. The report alleged that the deep state used tactics like leaking obstruction and even weaponizing government agencies to protect their power if they perceive DOGE as a threat. It's conceivable they would resort to similar tactics.
This feels like a high-stakes battle between those who want to reform the system and those who benefit from maintaining the status quo, and the stakes are incredibly high. This kind of conflict could really damage our institutions and erode public trust.
It's a critical moment, no doubt about it, but what if DOGE fails? What are the implications then?
Okay, let's consider that scenario. If DOGE is unable to overcome these challenges and make real changes, what does that tell us about the state of our government?
A failure of DOGE could suggest that the system is too rigid, too resistant to change it, could reinforce the perception that the deep state, whether it's Congress or unelected officials, is simply too powerful to challenge.
Yeah, it's a pretty bleak outlook, the idea that we're stuck with a bloated, inefficient government that's vulnerable to manipulation and out of touch with the people's needs.
It's not an encouraging picture, that's for sure, and it could further fuel disillusionment with government and a decline in civic engagement. People might feel like their voices don't matter and that real change is impossible.
Is there also a risk that a DOGE failure could backfire and actually strengthen the deep state if they successfully resist these efforts to reform the system? Wouldn't that embolden them to become even more assertive and less accountable?
That's a valid concern. It's like a self-fulfilling prophecy. If the deep state believes they are untouchable, they might be more likely to overreach and abuse their power.
This is all pretty concerning, but it underscores why this whole conversation is so important. Whether DOGE succeeds or fails, the issues they are trying to address, government waste, the influence of the deep state, and the need for greater accountability, are not going away.
Exactly. And it's crucial that we, the public, stay informed and engaged. We can't just sit back and hope that someone else will fix the system. We have a responsibility to hold our elected officials accountable and demand a government that is transparent, efficient, and truly serves the best interests of the people.
Well said. This deep dive has been a real eye-opener, and it seems like we have even more questions now than when we started. But that's not necessarily a bad thing. It reminds us that these are complex issues with no easy solutions. It's up to all of us to keep learning, keep asking questions, and keep pushing for a better future.
I couldn't agree more. This has been a fascinating exploration of the forces shaping our government and the challenges facing those who seek to reform it. And it's a conversation we need to continue having.
Absolutely. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We encourage you to keep exploring these ideas and forming your own conclusions. Until next time, keep questioning, keep learning, and keep diving deep.
Hey folks, thanks for tuning in to Deep Dive Dispatch. We hope you found today's episode enlightening and packed full of insight. Remember, your support keeps us diving deep into the stories that matter. So if you enjoyed the show, make sure to download and share it with others who crave a deeper understanding of politics and history. And don't forget, we want to hear from you. If there's a topic out there that you think deserves a deep dive, reach out and let us know. Your input helps us bring you the most compelling content week after week. Stay curious, stay informed, and we'll catch you next time on Deep Dive Dispatch. Keep exploring, folks.